Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics. In association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it. We are back in action on Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast, the official podcast of WFAT, where we connected. Our guest this evening is Dr. Jessie Oldham. She is an assistant professor within the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine. She has a dual Bachelor of Science in Biological Science and Nutrition Science from North Carolina State University, a Master of Science in Kinesiology from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and a Doctorate in Applied Physiology from the University of Delaware, and is an expert in the field of concussion research and application of knowledge on the subject of return to function following this injury. Jessie, welcome. I really appreciate your time as always. Last time we had the opportunity to connect was in May in an abbreviated chat at the WFAT World Congress. I've been looking forward to getting you on here sort of in full embodiment of what you're doing, maybe a little bit of a longer conversation and without the setting up of the awards banquet dinner in the background. So really appreciate it. Let's just say hi to everybody and we'll jump in.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to kind of pick up where we left off amongst the setup and the very brief conference happy hour last time.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it was a brief conversation, a great conversation. I think it was session 106, if I'm right. We've only had sort of few and far between since then, but you and I have tried to align, mostly because of your passion and your desire and all the work that you're doing in concussion, and not just about concussion, but about the thing that makes a lot of difference to athletes and to practitioners that are on the day-to-day on the floor and on the field with athletes. And that's return to function, dual tasking, these things that are really, really critical to return to play. We were just having an internal dialogue here in my current role as to, we're really good with ankles when it comes to rehab and having protocols and having sort of like, okay, once they get to this stage, we move to this stage, and knees and those other things. And post-operatively, we have protocols. Concussion's a different one. It's a bit of a different beast. It's a little bit more subjective. No concussion is the same. Let's start there. I mean, what would you advise in terms of right off the bat? And we'll definitely get into all the things that you're doing because we want the audience to hear about those things. But when it comes to concussion protocols in terms of returning to function or returning to sport, your advice from a general or specific angle?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I would say, just like you said, if you've seen one concussion, you've seen one concussion. Not to, downplay any other injuries, certainly, but things like ankle sprains, knee injuries, like you said, there's a set rehab protocol for those. Concussion's a lot more difficult. Because it's an invisible injury. We can't look inside your brain and see what's going on. B, it's so reliant on symptoms. At that point, you're relying on your athletes to be honest with you about their symptoms, because there's not always going to be this, exaggerated display of somebody falling over after they get a concussion. And we know that loss of consciousness doesn't have to occur with a concussion. So sometimes it can be hard to tell if an individual truly has a concussion. That's where you really have to rely on, I think, knowing your athletes. And I think athletic trainers are in the best position to do that. They know their athletes better than anyone. And so, you have to treat what you see, but always err on the side of caution. Better safe than sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sort of long-term health, we know that there are certain things that may or may not be associated with concussion, some things that certainly are, and obviously serving the athletic population in their best interest and the interests of best practice would go safe over sorry any day of the week. So these protocols, obviously hot topic in terms of the rehab side of things, obviously a hot topic when it comes to what are the protocols in place in pro sports, and they're different from sport to sport. An obvious example in the NFL recently with the Dolphins quarterback, and not to speak that you had anything to do with that, but are there any points that sort of you want to take away from that or drive home with regards to what we see on TV or what's portrayed through the media? Those kinds of things are obviously hot topics right now, but also sort of semi-subjective in terms of we only see part of the equation. We don't necessarily know what's going on behind the scenes, what evaluations were done, those kinds of things. Your take on the scenario, if you're open to discuss it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a loaded question. And like you said, the way that things get portrayed in the media, as soon as I think the clip of Tua went on Twitter, everybody on Twitter was a concussion expert all of a sudden. And so, the NFL got themselves in this tricky spot where it didn't take an expert to look at him and tell that there was something wrong with him. On the original hit that he took on the Sunday night game, he was falling over. He was stumbling, clearly couldn't walk straight, which is an obvious sign of impairment. He should have never been allowed to go in that game. And he certainly shouldn't have been allowed to play on Thursday. And so I think it's a multi-level problem. Obviously they fired the independent neurotrauma consultant that's unaffiliated. I think that's just one step of the failure of the treatment that Tua received. And, I know that they've updated the protocols now. The NFL Players Association came out and was like, okay, they've added ataxia to the concussion protocols now, where if anyone displays ataxia or a, loss of instability, loss of balance, they automatically can't return to play, which it's great that now that's in there. It's kind of hard to believe that wasn't in there in the first place, where if somebody gets hit in the head and can't walk straight, you would think that obviously they would be withheld from play. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. And then that's what we saw on Thursday is clearly an example. He was never healed from that first injury, which is what made his second injury much worse, at least from what it seems. And it can be very dangerous. It gets into the realm of second impact syndrome and then conditions like that, where there's a catastrophic injury because the original brain injury hasn't healed. Thankfully, it does not appear that happened in this case, but it's just still unfortunate that there was a failure of his care at so many levels. And so we hope that moving forward, we won't see circumstances like that, but you just never know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's also something to be said for the protocols that are in place and the people that are following those protocols. Is those are league mandated protocols. I'm more than happy that they've revised it to a certain level, and we'll continue to look at that, we hope. And all of the practitioners in the room are likely following a list that's two-dimensional on a piece of paper that says we did all those things so he can go back in. Maybe the common sense or looking at that video of seeing that, that instability following could be cut and dry, so interesting. Obviously the research in concussion and sort of looking into these highlighted scenarios on national television, international television when it comes to the NFL, those kind of things, relights the fire that you continue to sort of fan the flame of in terms of return to function and looking at some of those things, instability and the things that can be disrupted with brain injury, with concussion. And the research continues, and as we mentioned, we were talking before we got on here, a couple weeks time you're going to the Netherlands for a big conference. Maybe just speak to that, what you're doing there, what that conference is about, just for our audience, and what may come of that conference. Loaded question again.
Yeah, absolutely. Heading to Amsterdam in a few weeks for the Concussion and Sport Group annual meeting. And so this is a meeting specifically focused on concussion research, where clinicians and researchers and some people, representatives from sports governing bodies, all come together, and they essentially review the concussion research that has come out in the last 4 years. Typically, it's every 4 years. This time it's been 6 years, obviously, due to COVID-19. We had to postpone. It was supposed to originally be in 2020 in Paris. Then it was postponed to this year in Amsterdam. And so essentially, there's a committee that's been reviewing all of the concussion literature essentially that has come out since 2016, and they're making recommendations. And so what's going to come out of this is a new consensus statement, which is essentially guidelines for how concussion should be diagnosed, managed, what are the rehabilitation protocols following concussion. And so there's really going to be 8 domains that are coming out of this new consensus meeting. And at the end of it, there will be a new consensus statement that comes out that hopefully can help guide clinicians on best practices for concussion management.
Right. And so we look at, I'm glad that there are people in place reviewing all of this literature that's coming out. And then we get a consensus statement that is obviously important, but also deliverable to the practitioners out there, so that, some of us don't have time, or some may not have interest in reading all of the literature. So this consensus statement essentially summarizes what's gone on and where we're moving with concussion. I'm not sure if it's a sneak peek. I'm not sure if you have any inside information to anything that may be changing regarding that, but are there any sort of major changes in your opinion, to the consensus statement at this point, or you'll learn about it in a couple weeks?
I think what we could expect to see for sure, I think there will be a pretty significant update from a rehabilitation standpoint. Whereas, old practice was, okay, you put somebody in cocoon therapy, you cocoon them in a dark room until they feel better. And now, particularly since the last consensus statement, we've had a good amount of research come out that shows that actually that's one of the worst things that you can do. And so I would expect for the rehabilitation section to be updated to recommend some sort of return to light activity, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's just getting up and doing activities of daily living, doing laundry, taking dishes out, things like that. Just doing activities around the house,
Right.
instead of just strict rest, because the studies that have come out have really shown that strict rest actually delays recovery compared to people who return to some light exercise earlier in the protocol. So I would expect to see some differences in terms of return to exercise following concussion, those recommendations. There's still a ways to go. We still don't know what the exact exercise prescription is in terms of frequency, duration, things like that. But we do know now that the evidence is pretty compelling that returning to exercise a little bit earlier, as long as it doesn't make you feel worse, is actually going to help facilitate recovery in the long run. So I would expect to see some updated exercise recommendations. I would also expect to see a larger role with vision. The vision component of concussion assessment was one that wasn't really heavily represented in previous consensus statements. And with the work that's come out on visual dysfunction and vision assessment following concussion, I would also expect to see that more well represented this time around.
Perfect. And who knows, maybe we just line you up to be our consensus delivery person following that, but we won't put you on the clock for that one.
Happy to
Uh,
come back. And I
but
mean, in terms of the area that I work in largely, I would expect to see some updated recommendations in terms of incorporating dual tasking more frequently in as part of concussion rehabilitation. But we can talk about that when we get to dual task stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of where we want to go. And it's a nice segue into it, is that's where we started talking in May about your work and all the things that we're doing when it comes to rehab, when it comes to return to function, and looking at daily tasks as part of the rehab, as opposed to what can we take away and what do we not do. Like, let's use the evaluative tools that we have, watch somebody do the things that they would normally do, use that as a baseline, and then go from there. We were also talking just before you got on, you have lots of projects, lots of recruitment things going on at VCU and in the surrounding areas with the high schools and all of that. Where are you at with your research currently? What passion projects do you have? How many do you have on the go?
Oh, a loaded question again. So
That's all we
several
do, just loaded questions. Yeah.
several projects happening. It's an exciting time for sure. I've been at VCU for about a year now. And have been able to acquire some funding, several grants during my first year here, primarily still looking at a lot of the gait, postural control, dual task work, but also shifting to look at some more reflex assessments following concussion. So my most recent grant is evaluating the acoustic startle reflex following concussion. And so the startle reflex is a defensive reflex that's mediated by your brainstem. And we know that your brainstem is one of the areas that sustains the greatest shearing forces in the brain following concussion. So it made sense to me that, okay, if we know that the brainstem sustains these greater forces in some other areas of the brain during injury, it makes sense that a brainstem mediated reflex would show impairment. And so that's what we've been testing so far. Our preliminary data is showing that in people with both a concussion history and who are recently concussed, they have a significantly suppressed startle response compared to healthy individuals. And so we don't know what this means ultimately yet, but it is showing that there are some clear differences in this neural pathway response between people who have had a recent brain injury and those who haven't. So that's kind of where I'm focusing all of my area in now. It makes sense, right? If you think about a sporting environment, an athlete, they're encountering unexpected stimuli constantly, whether it's a ball or unexpected contact from another player or field conditions. A healthy athlete constantly has to be prepared for unexpected obstacles during sports. And so essentially what we're doing with startle is seeing how they respond to unexpected, in this case, we're sounds, because we're doing the acoustic startle reflex. And so individuals will hear a random burst of noise at random intervals, and it oftentimes makes them jump a little bit. It makes them startle. And so one of the reasons that it made sense for me to look at this in an athlete population is to see how they respond to these unexpected stimuli and see if there is some impairment in their response. And at least from our very preliminary pilot data, the results are encouraging that they do. And so we'll see what happens from here. We'll see what that means.
Amazing. And it's just so fascinating to sort of to hear, to listen to you, and to see you sort of smile and talk about this so passionately. And for me, I'm just sort of following the pathway of thought to developing, where and why and how you go about doing that, and then how that applies to sport. And I think that goes a long, long way. Like I mentioned in your intro, is it's not just the research and sort of getting this as the basis for what we do, but it's also the application piece to the people that are reading the research, the people that you're working with, the athletes, that you understand this multimodal environment and the unpredictable nature of being an athlete, of being a human being, and then to have the foresight to sort of look into these things and then build them from there. So congratulations on the grants, congratulations on the work. I think shaping this world and sort of helping the normies out there like myself that are not doing the research, but certainly paying attention to those that are, to formulate best practice in return to sport, and understanding sort of why we need to do science and why we need to do research as a basis, and be informed on what's happening. So just to backpedal a little bit to the gait analysis, when you say looking at sort of disruptions in gait, I know that's where we started sort of in May when we were talking. What tools are being utilized in your research for the gait analysis, and then what do you use? Let's start there, and then we can move into sort of the acoustic function as well. Yeah.
Sure. So last time we talked, and pretty much the majority of my gait work up until this point has been done using wearable accelerometers. So we were using the Opal sensors from a company called APDM, and you would put one on each foot and then one around the waist, essentially, and have them walk, and it would send information and like gait speed, stride length, cadence, gait variables like that. So that's what I was using previously. I have now, just with these new studies at VCU, switched to using a mobile app, actually, called the Improve Gait app. And one of my colleagues, David Howell, had played a role in helping to develop this app and validating it and everything. But essentially, you just put a smartphone in kind of a running belt, and you put it around your waist, and it's able to record a lot of the same parameters that the wearable accelerometers were. So it's been constantly this shift of how can we measure gait and balance in a more clinician friendly way. So obviously a lot of it started with very sophisticated gait labs with force plates and motion capture, but if you go to your average high school or even most colleges aren't going to have access to that kind of equipment. So when we transitioned to using the wearable accelerometers, that was a way to get a step closer to making it more portable and clinically friendly, but those are still expensive, and those still take a significant amount of training to be able to use. And so then something like a gait app that we've progressed to using now is great because it's a downloadable app from any of the app stores on your phone, and anyone can use it. It's very user friendly. So it's been great that the technology has advanced to where we're able to evaluate some of these measures in a way that most people have access to, instead of it primarily being in these sophisticated biomechanics lab that most people won't ever get to step foot in.
Right. Beautiful. And that application piece, again, from where you have all the resources in the world to not quite as much to, very few or limited resources, goes a long way for all the high school trainers out there, high school therapists, people that are just in roles, the sort of between groups and just sort of serving as field or coverage or, spot coverage and those kinds of things. So amazing, an amazing share for everybody out there as well. And when we look at gait analysis, then we look at the injury, and then we look at return to function from an injury. What are, if there are, sort of common findings or things that you've noted in your research that may not be well known, or maybe they're obvious in your mind, but that athletic trainers, athletic therapists, people that are out there in the field, what could be noticeable maybe with the old eye test or findings that you found sort of, that would be usable in the field of play?
Sure. Yeah. So again, it really comes down to the individual. Some people, so we have two different gait tasks that we primarily use. We'll use just a standard, somewhat overground walking where they're just walking back and forth down a hallway. And then we have the tandem gait test where they're walking like heel to toe. Think about a sobriety test, if you will, like walking heel to toe down a line. Those are just two examples of the gait tasks that are most commonly used. And so sometimes you'll have people who are extremely symptomatic, who will come in following concussion and can barely walk in a straight line. Other people won't be as noticeable. Like I said, not everyone is going to have this extreme response to concussion, like we saw with Tua, where he was stumbling and couldn't walk straight. Some people will look like that, but others won't. And so overall, what the majority of our findings have shown is that individuals pretty much across the board adopt what we call a conservative gait strategy. And so what we mean by this, they walk a lot slower, so their gait speed is significantly reduced. Their stride length is shorter. They're spending more time in double support, so with 2 feet on the ground as opposed to single support with 1 foot on the ground, because it's a more stable phase. So overall, they're just walking more conservatively. They're being much more conservative with how they're moving. And we see this under single task, but particularly under dual task when we have them divide their attention purposely. So instead of just walking, we're having them walk and count backwards or walk and spell backwards, because it's very easy to compensate for one system when you're just walking. But when we test two systems, when we test your cognitive and your motor system, it's interesting to see how people choose one or how they prioritize cognitive or motor. And so these gait impairments are particularly much more noticeable under dual task conditions. And again, it'll vary from person to person, but the general consensus is that overall they're just moving a lot more conservatively. And I think where this becomes problematic is that, we've seen again a lot of David Howell's work has shown that these impairments are lasting beyond clinical recovery. So even when they've returned to baseline on impact or BESS or SAC or assessments like that are commonly used, we see for up to days, weeks, even months sometimes that these gait impairments are still present. And so that led us to do the study coming out of my doctoral work, where we looked at the relationship between gait and subsequent musculoskeletal injury. And again, we found that those individuals who were most likely to sustain a lower extremity musculoskeletal injury in the next year were the ones who were walking more conservatively. They had a different gait strategy compared to those who didn't. And so I think that's important for clinicians to be aware of, that gait is a very valuable tool to evaluate overall neurological function.
Absolutely. And I think even just sort of pairing these together where you have a conservative gait and then you have essentially a delayed response to startle response. We start putting these things together, and it's a very stackable argument as to slowing down the rehab, or at least challenging multimodal challenge, dual tasking, tri-tasking, whatever the case may be, as part of the rehab. So practitioners that are out there right now, we're speaking with Dr. Jessie Oldham, who's down at VCU Health as part of the School of Medicine there, and some really powerful work, I think. And it may seem straightforward in your work and potentially in some of the practitioners out there, but I challenge, practitioners, therapists, trainers out there to question what's being done when it comes to rehab, because in a lot of places, it's still a matter of, let's get the heart rate up a little bit. Okay, no symptoms. Let's get the heart rate up a little bit more. Okay, good. Now you're going to go back to sports specifics. Like, all of a sudden, we're missing a bunch of steps in here, in those transitory phases, where if you take an ankle or you take a knee, we're not just going from jogging to cutting to pivoting, landing, and jumping. And so maybe we can fill those gaps a little bit more, in hearing some of the things that are consensus from your research, and this research is being done through your doctoral work and sort of elsewhere. Have you found a lot of play into field in the college athletic space, or like influence into the space to start looking at dual task? Like, is that sort of starting to take off as a uniform approach to rehab, and even as baselining athletes coming into perhaps a training camp or a school year or a season?
Yeah, I think the universities that I've worked with in particular have started to adopt using single and dual task tandem gait, particularly, as opposed to, or at least in addition to, the balance error scoring system, or the BESS, which is, the most, I would still say the BESS is the most widely used balance assessment. But there are a number of limitations with the BESS, and some of our work on tandem gait has shown that psychometrically tandem gait is better. It's does a better job at identifying actual postural control impairments following concussion than the BESS does. It has better sensitivity, and you know just seems to be a better tool. And so I have been happy to see that in a lot of the schools that I've worked with, they've started to adopt using tandem gait as assessment to evaluate postural control, both single and dual tasks. So, I can't speak to super widely across the country, but I do know at least once we've tried our best to educate the athletic trainers and physicians and other clinicians at particular schools, that they've started to adopt this other approach. And so I'm hoping that we can continue to do that. We'll see. I don't know whether tandem gait will make it into this version of the consensus statement. I guess we'll wait and see. I hope so, but we'll wait and see in a few weeks what comes out of it.
There you go. Beautiful. And we hope it does. If it doesn't this time, I'm sure as it continues to gain more and more momentum and more usage and more data behind it, it will certainly play a role in that in the future. And our listenership, and just getting this information out there. Again, we really appreciate your time. I really appreciate making time again, from the first time that we sat down next to each other to now being sort of across the border, and being able to carve in some time to share all of this, because it goes a long way. And I think it also provides more insight into the athlete. And you talked about it earlier on, is the athletic trainers, the athletic therapists that are there on the day-to-day basis with athletes. As much information as you have provides a much greater baseline than just sort of that's their number, that's their position, and I know what they do, sort of thing. So tandem gait, or just watching them walk to and from class, like, although maybe not a valid test clinically or academically, watching somebody move when they are healthy, and then seeing that something is off provides insight to the practitioner, at least to dive in a little bit more. And you've highlighted some of those things. If an athlete is hiding an injury and nothing shows up musculoskeletally, maybe we can look back on some of the tape, or just go back and check some of these things as part of a suspected concussion, or just to see what else may be going on. So some really amazing work, I think, and highlights a lot of things that we could be doing from a front-ended standpoint instead of a reactive standpoint once an injury has happened. On that note, what does a baseline look like for you in an ideal world when it comes to concussion baseline testing, whether that's a high school athlete, a college athlete, whichever way you want to go, or a human being just in general? What are sort of the check boxes that you would advise in terms of a baseline? I know there's a lot of back and forth and sort of what is being done. The best needs to be done, the scat, the impact, this, that, the other thing. Let's sort of sift through that and take your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important thing for baselining athletes is that it needs to be a multimodal assessment. There is no one assessment that's good enough. And so it's discouraging when you hear high schools that are like, oh, we just do the impact test as part of the baseline and that's it. They don't do anything else. Again, obviously it's a multi-tier problem. Schools are understaffed. There may not be enough time. There may not be enough athletic trainers. Oftentimes there's only one athletic trainer for an entire high school. So I understand that there are infrastructure challenges, but the important thing with concussion baselining is that you need to get a picture of the whole athlete. And so just doing impact or just doing the SAC or just doing BESS isn't going to do that. And so the most important thing for clinicians who may be baselining their athletes is going to be to use a multifaceted approach. Concussions are multifaceted injuries. And so they may appear in more domains than just one. So if it was me, my perfect baseline, you obviously are going to ask symptoms. There needs to be a cognitive component. There needs to be a vision component. So something like the VOMs or eye tracking or some sort of visual assessment. There needs to be a dynamic balance assessment. I don't think that static balance or quiet stance balance is enough. I think there needs to be a dynamic balance assessment done under both single task and dual task conditions. And really, again, reaction time is great. The startle stuff is not as clinician friendly yet as we hope it will be, but I do think that looking at reaction time and looking at how long it takes an individual to respond to a stimulus is also a critical area of importance. So the bottom line being, it needs to be a multimodal assessment where there are multiple assessments that evaluate all the different domains that may be affected by concussion. That's the best case scenario.
Yeah, no, beautiful. And I think I may be inferring, but if we just flip that to post-injury, the assessment should look similar to the baseline in terms of what you would recommend from post-injury, acute, subacute, chronic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I alluded to earlier, with some of the things that we've seen with dual task postural control, we're still seeing signs of impairment even when they were cleared to return to play by all other measures. And so I do think that it's important when possible and as much as possible to replicate that baseline for all post-injury evaluation time points.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think, again, highlights this for all of the practitioners out there. It makes sense to me as a practitioner. It doesn't seem overly daunting, but does seem super valuable to gather as much information before and after, and then in the best interest of the athlete always in terms of care and approach to injury and concussion. And so lots of things going on in the concussion world. You have poured so many hours and so many things into your research, and I think this is amazing that you're willing to come on here and share that and continue to sort of push the envelope in new areas and grant money in high schools and college. And VCU is lucky to have you. We're lucky to have you, and really appreciate you coming on. I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know it is season for you, but anything else you want to sort of highlight or leave with the audience? This has been a lot, and I just think we could go on forever, but I have a short attention span when it comes to these things. Maybe some of the audience does as well, but we would love to have you on sort of on a regular basis as our concussion guru, as an update from the consensus in the future. Whatever you're willing to give with your time, we really appreciate. So I'll leave you sort of to summarize or anything we may not have gotten to this evening.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to chat with you, and I'm excited to be back and hope that we can do it again in the future. I guess my last parting words will just kind of be to summarize everything we've already talked about, which is, you know, concussions are a very complicated injury, and it's not something as simple as it's not something as so simple as things that are often portrayed in the media and on social media, following very prominent displays of injury like we've seen in the last few weeks. So we're trying to educate parents, coaches, athletes as best we can in terms of best practice, but it's a daunting task to try and spread our findings. The general population isn't reading the research articles that we work so hard to put out. And so I think the challenge that we still need to get better at moving forward is how to disseminate what we find in the research to the general public. And I think that's always going to be a significant challenge with us. I'm hopeful that with the new consensus coming out, hopefully that will gain some traction in the media and at least provide people in the general population, at least make them aware that these consensus guidelines will be coming out and are out there for them to use. So I'm excited to maybe come back and give an update once we get back from the consensus meeting.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you. And as your research progresses, we'll continue to follow, continue to share, continue to educate our audience and beyond. And for the practitioners out there, this is critical to know what's going on and to be aware of what's evolving and what is involved in sort of pre and post and during an injury. But at the same time, when your spidey sense goes off or your practitioner sense goes off and tells you something's wrong, investigate that. It's our role, it's our duty, it's our due diligence to ensure best practice and care of athletes and the humans that we work with on a regular basis. So Dr. Jessie Oldham with us again this evening, another guest that's repeating on here, this time without as much background noise, and I'm still in awe of all the things that you are doing and accomplishing, and truly appreciate it. It's Let's Chat. It's an athletic therapy podcast, the official podcast of WFAT, and we continue to grow with our audience. We continue to grow with people like you giving your time. So I'll let you close us out with a good night to the audience, but thank you once again for being here.
Okay, thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com, CONSULT@firststartherapy.com, on Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.